There are many reasons to celebrate the 17th of March. It is of course St. Patrick's Day, when alcoholics around the world pay homage to their spiritual homelands. It's also the birthday of Raul Morales, a player that in today's Football Manager games would have certainly had the gets crowd going trait. But more relevantly, if you're playing in one of Europe's top 6 leagues, the 17th of March is when you'll first be able to sign up your emerging talent as part of that season's youth intake. Now, there is a preview as to how decent your intake is looking, which usually comes through before the January transfer window opens, but it is on this very date that the opportunity to actually sign the players up comes along. So rather than giving you another video about how you can maximise your chances of an elite level intake, we thought that in today's video we would share the 3 key considerations we make when it comes to signing up a youngster or letting them go. Firstly though, I think it's worth calling out that, much like in a recent video of ours where we talked about the efficacy of the star rating system for current and potential ability, what we have in the evaluation of our youth intake email is again the result of a key staff member's judgment on each player's abilities. In this case, your head of youth development will usually deliver the email and their assessment of who is an elite, top, good, or otherwise decent but probably not good enough talent. So a quick bonus tip then is that if you've not got a good head of youth in your staff room, you may be being fed garbage information from the off. Similarly, much like how the star rating system behaves for current players, the evaluation is all relative to your league and club reputation, and that is how you can have a good intake that looks like this for a rich club, as well as, apparently, a good intake that looks like this for a minnow in the 5th tier of Spanish football. Believe me, we've been there. So, bonus tip number 2 then is to know your level and not get carried away in contract negotiations if you see an elite talent coming through whilst you're still essentially non-league. Now, we've already mentioned that there are a few tips videos in the FM ether talking to how you might improve your chances for a stronger youth intake, and we'd recommend one from around 3 months ago over on FM Scout if you want to learn more about the levers that you can pull here. But let's get into FM Immortal's 3 things to consider before signing on any youth player, shall we? Now, it's easy to fall into the trap that each of these tiers represents the definitely, maybe, or definitely not response to whether or not you should sign a player. But our first consideration is always this one. Are they going to develop well? The answer lies in but a few attributes and characteristics on each player's overview page. We're talking determination level and personality type. If a player has a determination of 14 or over, I'll be inclined to sign them up even if they have a predicted ceiling of 3-star potential ability, because I at least know they are going to probably get there. And of course, if and when they do, they'll be worth a lot more than I'm signing them on for. So it's fiscally responsible as much as anything. But that decision is compounded if the player possesses any of these personality types, which I've ordered from best to worst, and which are all essentially the best possible options a player's personality can be in Football Manager. We'll do a separate video on how using mentoring groups can help with these personalities developing, and how these are often reflections of the game's hidden attributes in the future. So yeah, consideration number 1 then, are they actually going to develop? Consideration number 2 though is, can they help the club? Now, there are a few angles on this consideration too, but fundamentally, if the player's favoured role is in a position that doesn't exist in any of my tactics, he's probably not even going to get minutes for my B team, because remember, the second and youth setup coaches often mimic the first team tactical approach. So if a defensive winger was going to come through and I'm playing a 4-4-2 diamond high press formation, are they realistically ever going to get minutes for me? I don't think so. And that brings me back to my point in consideration number 1. If the player is good in the future, surely I can sell him to make a profit, right? Well, yes and no, because that profit will depend on how much they develop. And again, if they are getting no playing time and relying solely on training to improve their game, they're probably going to plateau or perhaps even decline on that adjudged current ability. Of course, in severe circumstances, another angle is, can I fill a vacancy? probably caused by injury pile-up, in my first team with any of these top talents. Now, we are delighted to say that we gave a 16-year-old a debut just days after signing him up, and he turned out to be quite the baller. But the mistakes eventually started to stack, and suffice to say, sticking these guys straight into the first team on a regular basis is not a foolproof way of developing them. But as you'll all know, when it comes to European competitions especially, having at least 4 players that trained at the club registered in your squad of 25 is essential. And that's just another reason why the youth intake is an important element to fully understand. I think that the tip here though is to look out for versatility when a player's favoured role doesn't align to your tactic, and make the tough decision to pass on those who would otherwise be isolated in your youth setup if they are only familiar with a position that doesn't align to your tactic. Consideration number 3 then is sort of an amalgamation of the first two, and it's whether or not the player is a worthy investment. Now, I keep coming back to the financial side of signing a player, and usually the youth contracts are so affordable that it makes little to no difference to your wage budget. But that's exactly why I think the majority of FM players can benefit from this advice, because I think we've all fallen into the trap of assuming that these bans are gospel when it comes to who you should or shouldn't sign. And in reality, there's a lot more to it than that, particularly if you're operating on thin margins. We took control of Guadalajara in the lowest league playable of Spain for our first FM24 save, and to say we were a little strapped for cash would be an understatement. There were some players that we were offering £5 a week to sign up as youth contracts. But for those who wanted to play semi-professionally, that average wage was around £55 per week. Now, seems like nothing, but at that level it's remarkably the equivalent of about the quarter of a decent player. So for every 4 youth candidates I was signing on, I was short 1 good squad player. Our latest save is a bit of a juxtaposition on that one. A significantly wealthier club. We're at Marseille in Ligue 1, and yes, the youth contracts remain negligible. But most interestingly, the soon-to-be breakthrough prospects that we are signing up still account for around 1/18 of a decent player's salary. So in terms of how many youth players you can fill your rosters with before significantly impacting wage budgets, you're probably looking at a scale similar to this one on screen. So our final tip for this video is to think where else you might be able to invest that 4 or 5 times the average youth contract in your club before commissioning those signings. Quite a long one today, but we hope it was quite a fresh take on the fact that you don't have to sign every player pitched to you as a top talent, and you shouldn't necessarily pass on every one of those below the good line either. If you've enjoyed this video, please drop us a like as it properly helps us out. But until next time my friends, have a happy new year. Adios.